감사합니다. So I'm Laurence Moroney. I'm a developer advocate at Google. I'm here today to talk a lot about Firebase, one of my favorite technologies at Google. I work on Firebase and Google Maps and a few other things. And if you were here for the previous session, Kat built this. She very quickly showed you how to build a translator app so that you can translate between different languages. And you could do it in a serverless way using the next generation architecture that I spoke about earlier this morning. So today I wanted to say, let's see, if she's built an app like this, how can we take that to the next level? How could we launch and grow an app like this one? So what if we built on the demo that she had built, and say we had a real app where if you don't speak with another person and you don't speak their language and they don't speak or read yours, what would it look like? And how would you launch that and how would you grow it? So here's an example. I'm having a conversation with an imaginary friend of mine in Japan. And we're having this conversation with each other. And it's really cool because I love to visit Korea. I love to visit Japan. But I don't speak the language. So if I can chat with people locally and I can learn about the culture and I can learn about the place, that sounds like a winning app. So we say, OK, it's a great app. If we launch this application, it's going to be really successful. So we take this application, and we put it into the Play Store for Google, and we put it into the App Store for iOS, and then we get this. Nobody's using it. Nobody's using it because nobody's heard about it, right? It's like we're so excited about this application, and we put it out there, and it's been empty. This isn't great. So how do we fix this? Well, typically, you'll fix this by having a marketing campaign for your application. You'll have a marketing budget and you'll spend some money promoting your application, getting the press to cover your application, maybe putting some adverts on sites like Google and Facebook and others. And you'll get some success out of that. But this is the first step, I think, in growth hacking is there's a technology that we've put in Firebase that we call dynamic links that we think can make that even more successful. So let me talk about how dynamic links would work. So for example, say I'm traveling to Japan and I want to learn about Japan and I want to learn about going there. This app is great for me. So if I'm using Google and I search for traveling to Japan, we're all familiar with the adverts that are in there. And then those adverts would take us to a website. And then on the website, we could learn about this application and maybe get interested in this application. But what typically happens at that point? There's a button on the website to download the app in the App Store or download it from the Play Store. And that takes us to something like this, where we have that application, as well as lots of other applications. And it's like, which one do I want to install again? Oh, this game looks interesting. And I can get lost in the mess. I can get lost in the maze. So we said, wouldn't it be interesting if from this website we can do something called a dynamic link? What the dynamic link does, instead of just, I don't have the application installed, and instead of just taking me to the Play Store where I can install the app, that the dynamic link remembers the context about why I'm here. So if I go to the Play Store and I install the application, then instead of me just being taken to a random chat application, it knows through the dynamic link that I was interested in chatting with somebody from Japan, and it takes me directly into the app where I'm chatting with somebody from Japan. And that to me is one of the first steps of growth hacking. You have to delight your users instantly. You have to get them excited about using your application right away. And if you've spent time and marketing and effort in getting people to go to a landing page on your website, and that landing page just takes them to a random page in the Play Store or a random page in the App Store where your app is one among many, then they're not being delighted by your app right away. And with a dynamic link, keeping that context throughout, that's a great way to get them delighted. So I've now gotten my application, and I've spent a lot of money buying adverts and AdWords and talking to press and getting coverage, and I've launched my application, and now it looks like this. A little bit better, right? But what's wrong with this image? And this is an image from a real app, by the way. Well, most of my audience are in the United States or Western Europe. And that's all very nice, but most people in those places speak English. So it's like, what's the point of me having a translation app and having this great audience if people are just chatting with each other in English? So I see, okay, maybe it's a good app and people like to chat, but I'm not exploring the opportunity that's available in my app. And I can grow this much further. And I can see there's one person using my app in Japan, and that was probably me last week when I was testing it. So how do we make it better? How do we grow it further than that? And those are some of the questions now around growth hacking. What technologies are out there that we can use, and we can use inexpensively or even for free, that can then grow our application for us? And that's one of the things that I'm very passionate about and I work really hard on in Google. So the first of these technologies, of course, is understanding where our users are. Okay, understanding what the problem is. The first step in fixing any problem is knowing the problem. And here you can see with my application, it's very clear that I can see what the problem is. And the problem is, I'm very effective in the east coast of the United States, and I'm very effective in countries like France and Switzerland and Germany and some parts of the United Kingdom, but I'm very ineffective in Korea. There's nobody using it. I'm very ineffective in Japan. There's very few people using it. I have nobody in Australia, or very few in Brazil, nobody in India. So all of this intelligence is really, really valuable to help me to drive a strategy. And this is available to me when I use Firebase, completely free when I use Firebase Analytics. This is called a stream view in Firebase Analytics. And I don't have to write a line of code to get this. I just link the analytics libraries into my application for iOS or for Android, and I will get a view like this of users in my app. And what's even more exciting about this view is it doesn't show on this slide, but this screenshot I took was from people using an application within the last 30 minutes. So from where I was, like within the time I could see, and I was in Japan when I took this screenshot, that I could see people using it within the previous 30 minutes. So I can monitor where people are using it, how people are using it, who's coming online, how long they're using it, all that kind of thing. So I don't have a marketing budget anymore, but I do have all of this really, really useful information. So what can I do with it? Well, first of all, there's a technology called Firebase Invites that's available in Firebase. And the number one way that people discover apps that they keep is through referrals from friends. Friends always help friends discover great apps. I have a 16-year-old son. He just turned 6. I have a 16-year-old son, and he spends way too much time in the Play Store downloading games, playing games for 5 minutes, keeping the good ones, throwing away the bad ones, and then sharing the good ones with me. And this is every game I've played, I think, in the last 5 years, I've discovered through him. And what we've wanted to do is to put technology to effect so that everybody can take advantage of something like what I'm able to take advantage of. And that's the idea behind Firebase Invites. Firebase Invites is more than just a widget that you drop in that gives a contact list that will then share your application with people on the contact list. There are machine learning and AI steps involved in Firebase Invites to curate that content list. So for example, as I said, my son shares a lot of games with me. So if you had built Firebase Invites into your application and one of your users touched the share button in that, sorry, my son touched the share button in that, I would be right at the top of the list. And his mom, who says he plays way too many games and never installs one that he shares, would be right at the bottom of the list. So those type of things are available to you to reduce that kind of friction in getting growth. There's no point in having something where people can share an application if they share it with the wrong people, or if they have to spend a lot of time finding the right people. And that's the goal behind Invites. And combined with the dynamic links that I spoke about earlier on, then the idea is that not only will the application itself be shared, but context within the application can be shared too. So I like to use an example of a recipe app. If I'm to share an app with a recipe in it with you, and you don't have that app already installed, typically what would happen is you go through the Play Store or you go through the App Store, you install that app, and then you have to go searching for the recipe. This is friction. So with the dynamic links technology, if I share it with you, then the context of the recipe that I'm using to share will survive through the install process, even if you didn't previously have the app. So then the friend that you've shared with will launch the app and will see that recipe. This all goes back to what I've been talking about, where people are instantly delighted when they're using your app. And these are some of the technologies that will provide that for you. And to give an example of how Firebase Invites will give you the ability to share with friends and to have a customized list. Here's a screenshot I took from my device a few days ago when I was using this chat application, and I touched on the share button in it, and it gave me a list of people. Now, you may notice the top 3 people on the list all have the same last name as me, because it's my family and members of my family, people that I chat with a lot, people that I share with a lot. The average user has about 300 people in their contacts list. My last name begins with M, so in English, if you were to look for people of my last name, you'd be about halfway through. But instead of me fishing through 150 people, or half of my contact list, to find my relatives, it knows that I share with these relatives a lot, that I email, that I chat, that I share apps with them a lot, and they've bubbled to the top of the list. The 4th person on the list is my editor. As well as a Googler, I write comic books, and this person is my editor, and I have a new comic book coming out on Wednesday, and he and I have been chatting and sharing a lot, and as a result, when I took this, he bubbled up really high on my list. So the machine intelligence going behind this is trying to pick the right people based on the fact that the people that I've been conversing with recently, people that I've been sharing with recently, and again, greatly reducing the friction so that friends can share great apps and great content with their friends. But the nice thing about it is if you use a dynamic link instead of a standard link, is that analytics also apply. So here, knowing that when somebody shares something and you can measure the impact of that, that becomes something that you can then use to drive further intelligence. So here, for example, is a screenshot that I took, and it showed that 25% of the app invites that were sent out resulted in a new user of the app. That's really cool. So if I can encourage people to send out app invites, by understanding these stats, I can see that 1/4 of them resulted in a new user. So if I can somehow encourage 1 million people to send out an invite, I will get, on average, 250,000 new users. So how can I do that? Well, that's another part of the analytics, is that I can define an audience. So, for example, you saw on my map earlier on that I didn't have a whole lot of users in Japan. So I'm going to start with Japan and think, I can maybe build and grow a base there, and my translation worked great in Japan. So I can define this audience in analytics of people who are Japanese users. And I typically look at that as people who live in Japan or people who speak Japanese. There are lots of Japanese people overseas, and they will become part of my family of Japanese users. Similar for Korean, right? I can build an audience of Korean users as people who live in Korea or people who speak Korean. I was recently in Los Angeles, and there's a huge Koreatown there, and they could be a massive part of my audience as well. So now once I've picked and I've defined my audience, I can now use a technology called cloud messaging to address them. And if you're at my talk earlier today, I spoke a little bit about cloud messaging. And the main thing about cloud messaging, 2 very important things for you as an application developer. Number 1 is reliability. And with cloud messaging, it's a highly reliable, scalable infrastructure that delivers over 1 trillion messages per week. And actually, it's a lot more than that. That's just the last number that we announced. 1 trillion messages per week. And of those messages, 98% are received by connected devices in 500 milliseconds or less. So it's very reliable. And then the second part is that it's very flexible. And the neat thing about this flexibility is that instead of me spamming everybody who's using my application with a message, even if it's not appropriate for them, I can custom tailor my message to different audiences. So thinking about my growth hacking and seeing the statistic that I had that when people in Japan shared the application with friends, 25% of them installed it, I can think, let me craft a campaign and let me set up a campaign for Japanese users where I'm going to send a message to my Japanese users, and this message actually reads like, share this application and win a prize, and I can now pick that Japanese audience to send it to. I'm not building any infrastructure for this real-time messaging. Nothing whatsoever. This message is done using what's called a Firebase Composer inside the Firebase console, where I simply type my message, I pick my audience, and I send it. It's really that simple. And of course, I can measure its impact. I send this out to 1 million people. I can see how many of them have opened it. I can see how many of them have acted on it. So these statistics are there right now. And in this case, you can see the impact of sending a message. I can test which messages have the best impact based on what they say. So you can see here there were 2 messages were sent out in this case, where one of them was opened by 12% of the people that got it, and the other one was only opened by 8% of the people who got it. So again, I can continue to refine my messaging, and I can continue to refine how I'm doing this by looking at these statistics in near real time of how this is behaving. So now that I've gotten this, and I say, okay, I can target so many people in Japan, ask these people to share the application with their friends, and then I'll know that, based on previous experience, that 25% of them are resulting in a new install and a new user. This is great. Now, I spoke a moment ago, and I showed in this diagram that one message was opened by 12% of users, and another one was opened by 8% of users. And I can do a little bit of testing with what works in this using something called Firebase Remote Configuration. So with Firebase Remote Configuration, the goal of this is that I can put variable data for my application in the cloud instead of in the application, and I can drive the contents of that data based on analytics. So to give a very simple example of this is, I've built this application, I've launched my marketing campaign, I've gotten a bunch of installs around that. I've then launched these campaigns where I'm messaging people, encouraging them to share it with their friends, maybe rewarding them for sharing it with their friends, monitoring the impact of that. And then I realized that the number one thing is initial delight when they open the application. So I thought, okay, I'm traveling to Japan, I'm targeting people who are traveling to Japan and want to chat with Japanese users, so I'm going to change what the application looks like for them, and I'm going to make it look like this. How many people like this color? How many people don't like this color? Lots of hands, right? So it's like, here's my example of instead of me hard coding an application with this color in it, I could test this. I can put this into a remote variable and say, the background color of the application for people in Japan will be pink. The background color for people in Korea will be, hopefully I say this right, the background color for people in Korea will be mugonghwa. And maybe the background color for boring old people like me will be gray, and everybody else gets white. So that would look a little bit like this. So in remote config, I've set a value called background color. And for boring people like me, it's gray. For people in Japan, it's pink. For people in Korea, it's not on the screenshot, it's mugonghwa. Okay, that's right, I hope. And for everybody else, it would be white. So the intelligence that's going on here is that I haven't written any code for all this if-then. I've created a variable, and within the console in Firebase, for different analytics audiences, I've set it to a different value, and then the application will read that on the fly. And I can test that, and I can see if that works. So here would be my example if I did deliver it with the Sakura Mugonghwa pink, that my user retention was really, really bad. So more configuration, more data, being able to test that data, being able to drive insights from that data, and to understand what's going in my app. Those are the core parts of growth hacking. So when I think about the life cycle of what I've done and what I want to do that's very different from everybody else, instead of just launching an app with a campaign behind the app and then hoping for growth, I launched my app with a campaign behind the app and I hoped for growth. But I was then also able to take advantages of things that are in the Firebase platform to be able to growth hack that further, to be able to encourage people to share the app with their friends, to be able to use dynamic links to understand how the app is being shared or how people are installing the app, to get intelligence from that, and to use the analytics behind that to pick and define audiences that I can then encourage to use the app and maybe reward for using the app, to take a look at remote configuration, to drive different versions of the app to different people to see what works. It seems nobody likes my pink background color, so I know not to do that, so I won't delight people if I continue to use that, so I can remove that. And then if I continue to do this and continue to iterate on it, to try something, to look at the analytics, to get feedback on that, to measure that, to change my application as a result, that's what growth hacking is all about. And with Firebase, we've given you the tools to be able to do this. In the last session, you saw how Kat was using many of the developed technologies to build a great app. And here today, I just wanted to show you how easy it is and how inexpensive it is for you to be able to grow your app by having these technologies baked into the platform. One thing that's important to share is that you don't have to use all of these technologies. You can just pick one or two, or whichever ones you want to use. And I'm focusing on the ones on the right-hand side of this diagram. So how analytics is there free of charge and offers so many things, from a map of your users to a filter on which dynamic links are working, which messages are working, which remote configuration variables are working, through things like cloud messaging, so you can send reliable real-time messages to the right people so that they will receive that and they will act on that, and you can continue to test that. And by testing that, you'll see what your audience likes and what your audience doesn't like. Through using things like dynamic links, where instead of just a dumb share of here's my app in the Play Store or here's my app in the App Store, you actually have context embedded within the link. So your users, when they install the app, are taken to the content that brought them to desire that app, and again get instantly delighted. Through things like remote configuration, where you can change your app on the fly without downloading a new version of the app. You didn't like my pink application, and instead of me having to code, compile, deploy, and then instead of you as a user having to update to get a new version of the app, I could drive that through remote configuration, as well as understanding automatically what works and what doesn't. Through another technology I haven't mentioned here called app indexing, where app indexing allows you to leverage something that people do every single day, and that's search. And if they're searching for content using Google search on their phone, and you have that content within your application, then Google search can drive them to your application, and you can grow as a result. So there's lots of technologies in there for growth hacking. Some of them will work for you, some of them may not work for you, maybe all of them will work for you, but they're all driven by analytics. So if you use the analytics that's there within Firebase to understand your audience, you can really grow your user base, and you can continue to iterate and growth hack. So with that, I just want to say, Kamsahamnida, thank you very much.